The light within the lecture amphitheater was the color of a dying star, a soft, ambient amber that was easy on the ocular membranes of the cathar. It bathed the tiered rows of polished obsidian resin, where 24 younglings sat in poised silence. Their slender, multi-limbed frames were still, their carapaces reflecting the glow in muted shades of blue, green, and violet, the calm, receptive palette of focused learning. At the center of the sunken circular floor stood Instructor Xyloq. Xyloq was old, his own carapace a deep, lustrous silver gray, crisscrossed with the fine web of age lines that spoke of centuries spent in service to the Stewardship Council's educational corps. He moved with a deliberate grace, his 4 lower limbs providing a stable base while his 2 upper, more delicate limbs gestured to the swirling holographic display suspended in the air before him. Unlike the vibrant, data-rich displays of engineering or astrophysics lectures, this one was stark. It showed a single, unremarkable G-type main sequence star, orbited by a collection of rocky and gaseous spheres. We have studied the biologies of the chlorine-breathing Urians, the crystalline philosophies of the silicon-based life on Cygnus X1, and the hive-mind symphonies of the mycelial veil. Xyloq's voice resonated, a series of soft, melodic chimes that was the cathar's primary mode of vocalization. The meaning was carried as much in the tone and pitch as in the words themselves. We have prepared you for contact with over 300 sapient species, each with their own logic, their own drives, their own definition of harmony. But today we discuss the anomaly, the outlier, the species-designated territory who call themselves humans. A flicker of teal curiosity rippled across the carapaces of the younglings. They had heard whispers, of course. In the vast, interconnected network of the galactic concordance, humanity was a subject of intense, almost fearful fascination. A young species, barely spacefaring, confined to their own star system by choice and technological infancy. Yet they commanded a level of academic scrutiny usually reserved for galaxy-ending phenomena. The hologram shifted, zooming in on the 3rd planet, a beautiful, fragile-looking marble of blue, white, and green. By all metrics of the concordance emergence scale, they should be a simple species to understand, Xyloq continued, his tone becoming graver, the chimes deepening. They are carbon-based, oxygen-breathing bipeds. Their social structures are primitive, based on exclusionary tribalism and resource competition. Their emotional spectrum is chaotic, but not entirely alien. They possess concepts we can loosely translate as loyalty, love, and joy. In many ways, they are remarkably, distressingly, similar to the proto-sapient ancestors of many concordance members. He paused, letting the statement settle. The younglings shifted, their limbs adjusting their positions on the resin benches. But they possess a quality that we have encountered nowhere else in the known universe, not in this form, not with this intensity. It is a concept for which our language has no direct equivalent. We have borrowed their own term for it, for to use our closest analog, pathological dissonance, would be a profound understatement. Xyloq's upper limbs made a sharp, precise gesture, and the image of the planet was replaced by a string of human text. Malice, Malice, Xyloq chimed, the word sounding foreign and harsh in the melodic cadence of his speech. It is not simply the desire to cause harm. Many predator species cause harm to acquire sustenance. Many species cause harm to defend territory or progeny. This is logical, understandable. It is a function of survival. Human malice is different. It is the desire to cause harm for its own sake, for satisfaction, for pleasure, or most chillingly, for no reason at all. A student in the front row, Xyloq, whose carapace was a bright, idealistic turquoise, raised a manipulator. Her chromic signature indicated respectful skepticism. Instructor, her chimes were light and high-pitched. Forgive my query, but could this not be a misinterpretation? A failure of our xenopsychological models to account for a different form of survival logic. Perhaps the harm they cause serves a complex social function we do not yet perceive. Xyloq turned his multifaceted eyes toward her. It was the question he always hoped for, the one that proved his students were thinking, not merely absorbing. A logical and compassionate hypothesis, young Xyloq. It is one that our finest minds held for the first 50 standard cycles of our observation of this species. We sought a hidden calculus, a deeper game theory that would explain their actions within a framework of rational self-interest, however alien. We failed. We failed because we were looking for a purpose, a reason. We were attempting to map the geography of a chasm by assuming it had a bottom. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the core tenet of his entire course. The chimes of his voice dropped to a low, somber hum, a frequency that vibrated through the very floor. Their capacity for malice is a bottomless pit. The statement settled like a shroud. The ambient turquoise of Xyloq's carapace flickered, and a shade of troubled violet bled into its edges. To her right, another student, Kale, remained a steady, deep indigo. Kale was a pragmatist, his mind always on threat assessment and tactical response. He saw the universe not as a wonder to be explored, but as a series of potential threats to be neutralized. Instructor, Kale's chimes were clipped precise. Can you provide a specific data point, an example that moved this from hypothesis to accepted theory? I can, Xyloq said, his gaze sweeping across the assembled younglings. I will provide many, but we will start not with their grand, terrible wars or their planetary acts of self-destruction. Those are too large, too abstract. They can be rationalized away as political necessity or ideological conflict. No, to understand the pit, you must start with a single stone dropped into its depths. You must look at the small things. The hologram shifted again. It now showed a grainy, black and white moving image from a primitive human archive. It depicted a small, enclosed space. A human female was placing a bowl of food on the floor. A small, four-legged creature, a domesticated canine, approached it eagerly. Observe, Xyloq instructed. The context. This is a recording from what the humans called the 20th century by their local calendar. The recording was part of a psychological experiment. The human has provided the creature with sustenance. The creature trusts the human. They share a symbiotic bond, a primitive form of interspecies harmony. On the screen, the dog began to eat. Then the human female reached down and took the bowl away. The dog looked up, its tail ceasing its wagging motion, a clear expression of confusion. The human placed the bowl down again. The dog hesitated, then began to eat once more. Again, the human took it away. This was repeated. 5, 6, 10 times. The students watched, their carapaces shifting to a muddy, confused brown. This was illogical, pointless. The human was not eating the food herself. She was not storing it. She was simply interrupting. Now watch the creature's response, Xyloq urged. The dog, after the 10th interruption, stopped trying to eat. It lay down, its head on its paws, and emitted a low, distressed sound. It had learned that any attempt to sate its hunger would be met with denial. It had been taught despair. The purpose of this experiment, Xyloq explained, his voice devoid of warmth, was to induce a state they called learned helplessness. The data gained was minimal. The cost was the breaking of a creature's spirit for no reason beyond intellectual curiosity. It was not for survival. It was not for defense. It was harm, meticulously and calmly inflicted, to see what would happen. This is malice in its purest, most sterile form, the first stone. He let the image fade, replaced again by the tranquil, uncaring swirl of the blue and green planet. But the pit, as I said, is bottomless. The stones we will examine next are far, far heavier. The lecture ended, but a palpable disquiet remained in the amber-lit amphitheater. The students filed out, their usual post-session chatter, a flurry of high-pitched, excited chimes, noticeably absent. They moved in small, silent clusters, their carapaces displaying a troubled spectrum of violet and gray. Xyloq lingered, her turquoise shell now almost entirely overlaid with a deep, questioning purple. She approached the dais where Xyloq was deactivating the holographic projector. "Instructor," she began, her tone hesitant. "The example, it was disturbing, but is it not possible that the human researcher believed they were serving a greater good? That the knowledge gained, however small, could one day alleviate suffering on a larger scale?" Xyloq turned to her fully, his ancient eyes focusing on her earnest, youthful face. He recognized her spirit. He had possessed it himself many centuries ago. The belief that all sapience at its core strove for harmony and that apparent dissonance was merely a complex, misunderstood symphony. A valid question, Xyloq, and one the humans ask themselves constantly. They have a concept they call utilitarianism, the idea that the morality of an action is determined by its outcome, that the ends can justify the means. It is a seductive logic. He paused, his manipulators resting on the cool surface of the projector console. Let us explore that. The second case study I had prepared for our next session concerns a human institution known as the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. The human words were clumsy on his vocalizers, but he pronounced them with clinical precision. For 40 of their years, human physicians, individuals sworn by oath to heal, observed the progression of a debilitating disease in a group of 400 of their own species. They told the subjects they were being treated. They were not. Even when a simple, effective cure became widely available, the physicians withheld it. They actively prevented the subjects from seeking treatment elsewhere. Xyloq's carapace flickered with a sharp, sickly yellow of revulsion. But why? What knowledge could possibly justify such a betrayal of trust, such infliction of suffering? The knowledge they sought, Xyloq said, his voice a low, somber hum, was the full, unabridged progression of the disease. They wanted to see what would happen. They had the cure in their hands, the means to end the suffering, but their curiosity, their desire for a complete data set, outweighed their compassion. They watched as the subjects went blind, insane, and died in agony, all for the sake of a few more paragraphs in a medical textbook. Does that sound like a calculus aimed at a greater good, Xyloq? Or does it sound like the same cold, sterile impulse that took the food from the dog, scaled up to the level of a lifetime of human misery? Xyloq had no answer. She lowered her head, the colors on her shell churning in confusion. Go, Xyloq said, his tone softening slightly. Process this. We will discuss it further in our next session. Do not seek simple answers. The humans do not offer them. As she departed, Kale stepped from the shadows of the amphitheater's entrance. His deep indigo carapace was unreadable, a stark contrast to Xyloq's emotional transparency. Her idealism is a liability, Kale chimed, his tone flat. She seeks to understand. Some things should only be defended against. And you, Kale, you seek to build walls before you have even surveyed the landscape, Xyloq countered. Tell me, what did you take from today's lesson? That their unpredictability is their greatest weapon, Kale stated without hesitation. That their malice is not limited to their enemies. They inflict it upon those who trust them, upon their allies, upon their own kind. Any treaty, any alliance with such a species would be fundamentally worthless. The logical course of action is quarantine, complete and total isolation of their system. A popular sentiment among the Stewardship Council's more cautious members, Xyloq acknowledged, and a dangerously simple one. To quarantine a species is to treat them as a virus. It denies their potential for change, for growth. It denies their sapience. Their potential for malice seems to far outweigh any other potential they may have, Kale retorted. Your own lesson proves it. My lesson is not finished, Xyloq said, turning his back to the student and gazing at the now blank space where the hologram of Earth had been. So far, I have only shown you the stones that humans drop into the pit. I have not yet shown you what sometimes, against all logic and all probability, climbs out of it. Later, in the quiet solitude of his personal quarters, Xyloq accessed his private archives. The chamber was sparse, the walls lined with data crystals humming with silent information. He bypassed the official records, the historical archives, and the xenopsychological case files. He navigated to a small, heavily encrypted file marked only with a stellar coordinate. The memory playback was not a hologram, but a direct neural interface, a more vivid and emotionally taxing form of recollection. For a moment, the calm amber light of his room was gone, replaced by the harsh, unfiltered glare of a yellow sun and the stench of burnt hydrocarbons. He was younger, his carapace a vibrant cobalt blue. He was part of a covert observation team on a human orbital station, a chaotic, jury-rigged contraption called Haven. They were there under the Concordance's non-interference mandate, cloaked and shielded, studying the nascent stages of humanity's expansion into their own system. The memory focused on an incident, a catastrophic systems failure, an explosion in the life support module. Chaos. Alarms blared, a cacophony of human noise. Through his sensor logs, Xyloq watched the drama unfold. The station's commander, a human named Eva Rostova, was coordinating the evacuation to the single escape shuttle. But another human, a junior officer named Baines, saw an opportunity. With the command structure in disarray, he moved to the shuttle's docking controls. He intended to seal the doors, detach the shuttle with only himself and his few loyalists aboard, and leave the rest, including his commander, to die. He had resources on that shuttle, patents, data, things he could sell to a rival corporate state back on Earth. His personal gain weighed against the lives of 20 of his crewmates. For Baines, the calculation was simple. This was malice born of greed, logical in its own monstrous way. Xyloq logged it as a prime example of human competitive instinct overriding communal survival. But then, something else happened. Commander Rostova, realizing what Baines was doing, did not try to fight her way to the shuttle. She knew she wouldn't make it. Instead, she went in the opposite direction, towards a damaged maintenance conduit. She rerouted the station's remaining power, overriding Baines's control of the docking clamps, but, in the process, directing a fatal power surge to the section of the station she was in. Xyloq's memory replayed her last transmission, her voice strained but clear over the comms, directed at the stunned crew members now safely able to board the shuttle. "Get them home. That's an order." Baines was apprehended by the crew he had tried to abandon. Rostova was vaporized. Xyloq disconnected from the memory, the silence of his room rushing back in. His carapace was a dull, troubled gray. He had witnessed, in the space of 10 minutes, the absolute depth of human selfish malice and the absolute height of their self-sacrificing altruism. Baines and Rostova, two products of the same biology, the same culture, the same chaotic world. They were not two different species. They were two sides of the same incomprehensible coin. This was the truth of humanity. Not just the bottomless pit, but the star that sometimes shone within it. Kale saw only the pit. Xyloq refused to believe the pit was real. His duty, his impossible burden, was to make them see both. The second session began with an atmosphere thick with apprehension. The students took their seats quietly, the usual pre-lecture hum of conversation replaced by a tense silence. Xyloq observed them from the central dais, his silver-gray carapace absorbing the amber light. He could see the conflict churning on their shells. Xyloq's was a muddled blend of turquoise and violet, Kale's a stony, unyielding indigo. "Last session we examined malice on an intimate scale," Xyloq's voice chimed, echoing slightly in the quiet room. "The casual cruelty of a single experiment, the prolonged, deliberate betrayal of a physician's trust. Today we broaden our perspective. We will examine malice as a tool of social engineering, the art of turning a population against itself." The hologram flickered to life, not with a grainy image, but with a complex, shifting diagram of interconnected nodes. It resembled a neural network, pulsing with light. "This is a simplified model of a human belief structure," Xyloq explained. "Unlike Cathar logic, which is built upon verifiable data and communal consensus, human belief is highly susceptible to narrative, to story, and the most powerful stories are often those that are untrue." He gestured, and a single node in the network began to glow a venomous red. "This represents a lie, not a simple falsehood, but a carefully constructed narrative designed to provoke a specific emotional response. Fear, hatred, greed. In our previous examples, the malice was direct, one human or a small group harming another. But large-scale malice requires a different mechanism. It requires the consent, and often the enthusiastic participation, of the masses. To achieve this, you must first poison their perception of reality. Xyloq focused the lesson on a historical period the humans called the late 20th century. He detailed the rise of what they termed mass media, and with it, the perfection of propaganda. "Consider this case study," he said, the diagram being replaced by an image of a human-drawn caricature. It depicted a figure with exaggerated, grotesque features, labeled with a symbol representing a specific ethnic group. The figure was shown clutching bags of money and standing on the necks of other, normal-looking humans. "This image is not reality," Xyloq stated, his chimes low and resonant. "It is a weapon. It was created and distributed by the millions by a ruling faction. It did not use physical force. It did not fire a projectile. It infected the minds of the population with a single potent idea, that this small minority group was the secret cause of all their suffering, all their economic hardship, all their national humiliation. A student named Lyra, whose carapace was a calm, analytical gray, raised a manipulator. Instructor, this seems inefficient. The resources required to create and distribute such a volume of false information must have been immense. Would it not be more logical for the ruling faction to simply use its power to eliminate the minority group directly? An excellent point, Lyra, if you are thinking like a Cathar, Xyloq replied. But you must try to think like a human. Direct elimination by a ruling faction creates martyrs. It breeds resistance. It is messy and can lead to civil war. But if you can convince the majority of the population that the minority is a contamination, a threat to their very existence, then they will not only permit you to eliminate them, they will help you. They will do the work for you, and they will believe it is a virtuous act. The hologram shifted, showing crowds of ordinary humans marching in the streets, their faces contorted in rage, chanting slogans of hatred. It showed neighbors turning on neighbors, friends betraying friends. It showed shattered storefronts and families being dragged from their homes. The ruling faction did not need to force them. Xyloq's voice was a mournful dirge. They simply provided the lie, and the malice inherent in the human spirit did the rest. They created a story, and the population, out of fear and a desire for a simple solution to complex problems, chose to believe it. This is the true danger. It is not that humans are easily led, it is that they are so often willing, even eager, to be led into hatred. Kale's indigo shell seemed to darken. This confirms my assessment, he chimed, his voice sharp. They are mentally unstable. A species that can be manipulated into self-destruction on such a scale cannot be trusted. They are a contagion. The quarantine is the only logical solution. And what would you do, Kale? Xyloq challenged, turning to face him directly. If another species, observing our own history, discovered the great schism of the third millennium, when the logic purists attempted to cleanse the emotive factions from our society, they too used a form of propaganda, claiming that emotion was a disease corrupting the purity of Cathar thought. Would you agree that we, too, should have been quarantined for that societal failing? Kale was silent. The historical reference was a deep cultural shame for the Cathar. It was their one great brush with civil conflict, an era of painful dissonance that had taken centuries to heal. The potential for such failure exists in all complex societies, Xyloq continued, his tone softening. The difference is one of frequency and intensity. For us, the Great Schism was a singular, catastrophic anomaly. For humans, such events are the repeating, rhythmic drumbeat of their history. They learn, they forget, they repeat. The names change, the targets change, but the mechanism remains the same. He shifted the focus of the lecture again, moving forward in human history to their digital age. He showed them the evolution of the lie, how it moved from printed posters to broadcast signals, and finally, to instantaneous global networks where falsehoods could travel faster and farther than truth. They created a system of unparalleled information exchange, Xyloq explained, displaying a dizzying web of light representing their internet. It had the potential to unite their species, to eliminate misunderstanding and foster a new era of global harmony. Instead, it became the most efficient engine for generating and spreading malice ever conceived. He presented a case study of a phenomenon they called viral disinformation. A single, fabricated story that a politician was involved in a child trafficking ring operating out of a pizza restaurant was seeded into the network. The story was patently absurd, Xyloq said. It defied all logic and evidence, yet it spread. Millions of humans chose to believe it. Why? Because it confirmed their pre-existing biases against the politician. The story felt more true to them than the actual truth. It resonated with their tribal hatreds. The display showed the consequences. The restaurant was flooded with death threats. An armed man, a believer in the lie, traveled across the country and opened fire inside the establishment, determined to rescue the non-existent children. No government ordered this, Xyloq stated, the image of the armed man frozen on the screen. No ruling faction distributed this lie on a mass scale. It was born in the dark corners of their network and amplified by ordinary people. They weaponized their own information systems against themselves. They built a tool for enlightenment and used it to set their own minds on fire. This is not the malice of command, but the malice of the crowd, a bottomless pit fed by a billion tiny streams of hatred and fear. Xyloq's carapace was a pale, sickly green. But surely some fought against it, some tried to spread the truth. Yes, Xyloq affirmed. Always, this is the great human contradiction we will explore later, but the truth is quiet, complex, and often unsatisfying. A lie is simple, emotionally resonant, and loud. In the human cognitive arena, a loud lie often defeats a quiet truth, especially when that lie gives them permission to hate. He ended the lecture there. The weight of it was heavier than the first. The idea of malice being a personal failing was disturbing enough. The idea of it being a fundamental, exploitable feature of an entire species, psychology, was terrifying. As the students began to disperse, Kale remained rooted to his spot. Xyloq waited, knowing the confrontation was inevitable. "Everything you have shown us today, Instructor," Kale began, his voice dangerously calm, "is an argument for preemption. A species that can be so easily turned into a weapon against itself can just as easily be turned into a weapon against us. Imagine one of our rivals, like the expansionist Xyloq hegemony, gaining influence over their information networks. They could turn humanity into a rabid-attacked dog and aim it at the heart of the Concordance, all without landing a single Xyloq ship on Earth. Your tactical assessment is, as always, astute," Xyloq conceded. "Then why do you speak against quarantine? Why do you insist on understanding them? You are not teaching xenopsychology, you are teaching threat analysis. And the only logical conclusion of your own data is neutralization. Because you are only looking at half the data set, Kale," Xyloq countered, his voice firm. "You see the weapon, but you do not see the hand that builds, the hand that heals. You see the fire, but you do not see the ones who run into the flames to save others. I am not teaching you to fear them. I am teaching you to be wary, to be prepared. Fear leads to simplistic solutions. Quarantine, preemptive strikes, neutralization, and these actions, Kale, are themselves a form of malice born of our own fear. If we resort to them, what is the functional difference between us and the worst of humanity?" Kale's indigo shell rippled, the first sign of emotional disturbance Xyloq had seen in him. "The difference is survival, Instructor. The difference is the continued harmony of the 300 species of the Concordance versus the chaotic potential of one." "Is it?" Xyloq stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near-silent chime that only Kale could hear clearly. "Or is it that we would be sacrificing our own harmony, our own core principles, to become the very thing we are trying to protect ourselves from? That is the human trap, Kale. Their malice is so profound that it often tempts others to respond in kind. They drag you down into the pit with them. The true test is not whether we can defeat them, but whether we can face them without losing ourselves." Kale held his gaze for a long moment, the internal conflict visible in the subtle tremors running through his limbs. Finally, he gave a curt nod, a gesture of respect if not agreement, and turned to leave. Xyloq watched him go, feeling the immense weight of his task. He was walking a razor's edge. On one side was Xyloq's naive compassion, a path that led to underestimation and vulnerability. On the other was Kale's cold pragmatism, a path that led to xenophobia and a preemptive cruelty that would stain the Cathar soul forever. He had one more lesson to impart, the most difficult one. He had shown them malice as a tool, as a social contagion. Now he had to show them malice as an art form, malice for its own sake. He had to show them the true, terrifying creativity of human cruelty. He had to take them to the very bottom of the pit. He dreaded the next session. He knew that for some of his students, the journey down might be a one-way trip. For the third and final session, Xyloq altered the lighting in the amphitheater. The familiar, comforting amber was gone, replaced by a cold, sterile white light that leached the color from the students' carapaces, rendering them in stark shades of gray. The silence was absolute. The younglings sat as if carved from stone. They knew, on some instinctual level, that this lecture would be the culmination of all they had learned, the final, deepest descent. "We have explored human malice as a product of curiosity and as a tool for control," Xyloq began, his chimes stripped of all melodic quality, sounding like chips of falling ice. Today we confront its most alien and disturbing form, malice as a source of pleasure, malice as an end in itself. The central hologram coalesced, showing not a historical event, but an abstract representation of a single human mind. It was a storm of conflicting electrical signals, a chaotic mess of flashing lights and tangled pathways. Most sapient species experience pleasure as a reward for actions that promote survival or harmony. Sustenance, procreation, social bonding, the acquisition of knowledge. For the Cathar, achieving consensus is the highest form of pleasure. For humans, this is also largely true, but within them lies the capacity for something else. The capacity to derive pleasure from the suffering of others, a phenomenon they call sadism. He let the word hang in the cold air. It was a concept so foreign to the Cathar psyche that it bordered on the incomprehensible. To find harmony in dissonance, to feel pleasure from another's pain, it was a violation of the fundamental laws of empathy that governed all known social species. This is not the detached cruelty of the scientist or the strategic cruelty of the propagandist, Xyloq continued. This is an intimate, passionate cruelty. It is the architect of the most intricate and personal horrors this species can devise. His first case study was a human individual from their industrial age, a man named Herman Mudgett, though he used the alias H.H. Holmes. The hologram shifted to show the blueprints of a large, complex building. This is a structure that became known as the Murder Castle, Xyloq explained. It was designed and built by this one human for a single purpose, to be a factory of death. On the surface, it appeared to be a hotel, but its interior was a labyrinth of his own design. The hologram zoomed in, turning transparent to reveal the building's secrets. Note the features, Xyloq instructed, his manipulator tracing lines of light. Staircases that led to dead ends, doors that opened onto brick walls, soundproofed rooms and secret peepholes so he could observe his victims, chutes that led from the bedrooms down to a sealed, furnace-equipped basement, gas pipes that fed into locked vaults so he could asphyxiate people at his leisure. A wave of sickly yellow, disgust, and horror washed over the students. Xyrel's carapace was almost entirely gray now, her youthful turquoise utterly suppressed. This was not a weapon of war. It was not a tool of political oppression. It was a work of art, with human suffering as its medium. The man Holmes invested a fortune, years of his life, and a considerable intellect into the creation of this building. He lured dozens, perhaps hundreds of people inside. He tortured them, dissected them, and dissolved their remains in acid or burned them in his kiln. And he did it all for his own gratification. The complexity, the planning, the sheer creative energy dedicated solely to the act of inflicting pain, this is a level of dissonance we have no metric for. Xyloq paused, letting the full architectural horror of the concept sink in. This was not a moment of passion or a lapse in judgment. This was premeditated, systematic, and joyous cruelty. But the pit is deeper still, he said, his voice a relentless whisper. For one can argue that this Holmes was an aberration, a psychologically diseased individual, an outlier. The true horror is when this same impulse, this same pleasure in cruelty, becomes a feature not of one mind, but of a society. The hologram of the castle dissolved, replaced by images of a human conflict from their 21st century. The images were graphic, unfiltered. They showed prisoners of war, hooded and bound. They showed human soldiers, their faces smiling, posing for photographs with the tormented bodies of their captives. Observe the emotional responses of the captors, Xyloq commanded, his voice cold as the void. This is the Abu Ghraib prison. These soldiers were not ordered to torture for information. The acts they committed, humiliation, physical and psychological abuse, were not part of any official strategy. They did it because they had absolute power over their prisoners, and they discovered that they enjoyed using it. They documented their work with cameras, not as evidence of wrongdoing but as trophies, as fond memories. He showed them the images, one after another. Soldiers giving a thumbs-up gesture over a dead body. A prisoner forced into a stress position, wires attached to his hands. A pyramid of naked, hooded men piled on top of one another for their captors' amusement. Xyrel made a choking sound, a discordant chime of pure distress. Her carapace flickered wildly, cycling through a nauseating array of colors. "Why?" she managed to chime, her voice barely a whisper. "Even if they hated them, even if they were enemies, why this? Why the joy?" "That is the ultimate question, Xyloq said, his multifaceted eyes fixed on her. "And there is no logical answer. It is the core of the anomaly. It is the bottom of the pit. It is malice untethered from reason, from strategy, from anything other than its own dark satisfaction. It is the human capacity to turn another thinking, feeling being into a toy for their own amusement. And the most terrible truth is this: the potential for this behavior does not reside in a few defective individuals. These were ordinary soldiers. Given the right circumstances, a lack of oversight, a dehumanized enemy, a position of absolute power, this capacity can emerge in almost any of them." A heavy, profound silence filled the amphitheater. The lesson was over. The journey was complete. Xyloq had led them from a dog denied its food to an architect of murder to a group of ordinary people finding pleasure in abject cruelty. There was nowhere deeper to go. Kale's indigo shell was now the color of a starless night sky. He did not speak. He did not need to. His position was no longer a theory. To him, it was a proven necessity. His silence was more damning than any argument he could have made. Suddenly, Xyloq stood up, her frame trembling. "No," she chimed, the sound broken. I cannot accept this. There must be more. This cannot be all they are." "I never said it was," Xyloq replied softly. "But you have shown us nothing else," she cried, a wave of desperate turquoise flashing across her shell. "You have shown us only the darkness. If they are this monstrous, then Kale is right. They are a plague. We should erase them from the galaxy before their sickness spreads." Her outburst hung in the cold air. She, the idealist, the one who had argued for understanding and compassion, was now advocating for genocide. Xyloq looked at her, his ancient eyes filled with a deep sorrow. "And now you understand," he said, his voice resonating with a terrible sadness. "Now you have felt it, the reaction you are having, Xyloq, that deep, overwhelming revulsion, that fear that is so strong it turns to hatred, that desire to extinguish something you find utterly corrupt. That is the human trap. Their malice is so absolute it can spark a mirror of itself in the hearts of those who witness it. They can make you become what you despise." He had pushed her to the edge, and she had fallen. He had proven his point in the most brutal way possible. He turned to the rest of the stunned class. "This is my final, most important lesson. Our greatest defense against human malice is not a weapon, not a quarantine, not a wall. It is our own unwavering commitment to our principles. It is the discipline to observe this horror and not let it corrupt us, to understand the pit but to refuse to enter it." Xyloq's gaze fell upon the silent, rigid form of Kale. Then he looked at the trembling, broken Xyloq. He had given them the unvarnished truth, and in doing so, he may have created two new monsters, one of cold, logical extermination, and one of passionate, fearful hatred. The weight of his failure settled upon him. Perhaps the task was impossible. Perhaps the human anomaly was something no other species could truly comprehend without being destroyed by the knowledge. He erased the hologram, returning the amphitheater to a stark, empty white. "The course is concluded," he chimed, his own carapace a reflection of the room's bleak emptiness. "Go, meditate on what you have learned, and try to find your way back to harmony." The students filed out, not as individuals, but as a single, silent entity, moving like shades from a tomb. Xyloq remained alone in the cold, white light, the echoes of their collective despair his only company. He had shown them the bottomless pit, but he had failed to show them the way out. And he feared that in trying to warn them, he had only succeeded in pushing them in.